Welcome to Dead Headspace, a part of Silver Shamrock's Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and On Burying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. And it is now July, but June was Pride Month. Doesn't mean you have to stop checking out all the amazing LGBTQ creators. We have articles, a few by Eric LaRocca, and one by Bri that came out as of today of this recording. And the title of that is Say It 5 Times, How Candyman Sparked My Queer Awakening. It's not too long, so there's no excuse for you not to go to deadheadspace.com and check that out right now. My name is Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my lovely co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are joined by three amazing individuals. Eric Raglin. Say hi, Eric.
Hello.
Bri Morgan. Say hi, Bri.
Hello.
And Sofia, I'm so nervous. Ajram. I did not say it right.
It's all good.
I psyched myself up. And today's episode is actually the 100th recorded episode. And it wasn't even planned that way. So this is pretty awesome. It is called Sanitized, Queerness, and Horror. That was titled by Eric Raglin. Eric, please tell me why you came up with that title and why you're here today, sir. And anyone jump in at any moment.
Sure. Well, I mean, this panel came together in part because of some conversations that had been going on social media about representations of queer characters, particularly in horror, which is a genre. I don't use the word notorious because I feel like that's unfair. A genre known for messy, amoral characters. And I hesitate to say specific reasons why I'm interested in this because I don't know, they involve pointing fingers to specific people and specific reviews that I've read. But needless to say, there are some folks out there who are critical of, I guess, messy queer characters, who think that messy queer characters are in some way, you know, bad representation, like they give us a bad name or something like that. And I guess hence the title. I won't go on too long, but yeah, sanitized queerness and horror, queer characters who are, I don't know, made to be your friendly neighbors on the cul-de-sac, totally non-threatening. They smile, they mow their lawn. They've never had any complaints filed with the HOA. They're lovely people, and they have a very nice dog too. So anyway, I kind of rambled there, but yeah, sanitized queerness and horror. It bugs me.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. I think it says sanitized.
Oh, wait, what did you say?
I did it with a D as in the past tense. So
oh no, you're totally fine.
But I have to say before anyone else jumps in that Nat Edwards, aka TC Parker, was on that messaged us and said, "Hey, you should give them a shout out." So unfortunately, due to like time zones and stuff, we couldn't have Nat on with a bunch of different schedules. But Nat, you are here in spirit. Bri or Sofia, jump in. Why are you here?
Well,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was watching the Twitter thread kind of unfold, and I chimed in a little bit where I felt like it was appropriate, but especially as a bisexual woman in a straight passing relationship and a horror writer, I've kind of gotten all kinds of comments on my representation of queer characters or myself as a queer person, how I choose to live my life. So it's definitely something I'm interested in. And as I write more queer horror, I don't anticipate that it's going to let up any. So I think it's definitely worth discussing.
That's great. What about you, Sophia?
I can definitely relate to that. I am a bi genderqueer person, and so I've been seeing a lot of the, I guess, discourse that's been going on Twitter, and it feels like a little bit of a rehash of the types of dialogues we were seeing back in the day on Tumblr, and the title, like sanitizing queer horror specifically, is aptly named. Definitely what struck me, or one of the things that was really striking to me, was especially with it being around Pride Month, there's this sort of performative expectation of like coming out and being a visible queer. So if you're not under that sort of category, people either assume that you are cis or that you're not queer, and that you're not allowed to write these stories. And so there's been a lot of policing going on around how people choose to represent themselves, what types of stories queer people like to share, including, marginalized creators talking about something other than being marginalized. So there's stories that come out where the main character happens to be queer, but the story has nothing to do with their queerness. It's just a part of their identity. So that, and then a lot of like other Twitter discourse is kind of what got me interested and involved in this. But it's definitely been this like growing volcano that's, ready to explode or / has exploded this month, I find.
I was thinking about when you were talking, it made me think of this question for all three of you. Coming out is very personal. My best friend, as a kid, he was Vietnamese and his parents are from Vietnam. And when they found out he was a kid, he was like, I don't know, 6 or 8, or I don't remember, but they made him sleep outside in the trampoline. And their backyard trampoline. And I remember I'm like, that's so fucked up. And my point for bringing that up is because it can be damaging, I imagine, if it's not handled the right way. And how do you guys feel about the way that other people in that community, the LGBTQ community, how they handle possibly cis people or cis people under cis guys celebrating your community? And I'm struggling to find the right words, so I don't, excuse me for stumbling, but I don't want to come off the wrong way. How do you guys feel about representation from people that may not be cis, but guess what? They might be in the closet, and isn't that kind of like bullying and really damaging? Like, I don't know how else to word it, so someone jump in, please.
I think you're talking about sort of assuming whether someone is straight or gay. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm with a cisgender or heterosexual man, so it looks like I'm a straight woman, but I'm not. And if there's room for everybody at the table, and a lot of people try to police sort of other people's identities, I mostly see it with straight people trying to police queer people's identities. But I will say there is also a certain degree of queer policing that happens of different identities. So it's hard. You never want to assume you think somebody's orientation, and if someone tells you they're a certain orientation, just believe them. Don't question them about it. Don't push them on it or anything like that, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to live with it, and it's really none of your business.
That's well said. Eric or Sophia, anything on that topic?
I think also what's interesting is that everyone is learning and growing in their own time. And so not everyone is at the age where they fully understand necessarily what their gender identity is, what their sexual identity is. So I think approaching that with kindness and with like the understanding that I don't think the majority of people go out there creating work with like the intent to be malicious,
right,
or the intent to like represent toxicity, like because they want to like, I don't know, upset people. But when we look at a lot of the dialogues that are going on online, I think a good thing to take into account is like a lot of these are about developing guidelines for cis authors to be respectful and to not berate people writing about their own experiences. So it's important to approach that maybe by asking questions like, why do you want to write from this character's point of view if you're not queer? Or do you read from this community currently? Why do you want to tell these kinds of stories? And so asking a lot of those questions I find is helpful if you're writing from an experience that's not your own, or if you're like questioning or you're not sure. But I don't I find that there's more harm than good in like policing what it is that like people are allowed to write about. There's a lot of these like straw man arguments that are going on these days where it's like diversity can only be like one of two camps. It's either like it's mandatory to include at least one of like every identity, and if you don't, you're a racist, sexist, homophobe, and you're like perpetuating fascism. Or if you're not an identity,
fascism, Eric, shut up.
Exactly. And if you're not of a certain identity, you're disallowed from ever writing of that like group at all. And they're straw men arguments, and they take over online discourse, particularly in Twitter, because it's just like it's so inflammatory that people get like really riled up about it. But I think it's important to keep in mind that no one can speak for an entire group, and no one can hand you a blank check about what it's okay or not okay to write about. So I think particularly for queer authors, the whole point of like writing queer literature is that it's about the other. It's like about what's, you know, not usually seen kind of thing. So I think, I don't know, our identities are not a monolith.
This is interesting. Sorry, Eric, you were about to talk.
Go ahead, no, that's right. I was thinking of adding too. I mean, as far as, you know, policing people who might be straight passing or cis passing or something, or folks who might be in the closet but are interested in writing about maybe stories with queer characters, that sort of thing. I think fiction is oftentimes like one of the first safe spaces a person has to explore aspects of identity in that way. And I think to shut that out for folks who might be like even if they don't end up coming out of the closet, or even if they end up thinking like, oh, you know, maybe I'm not, you know, maybe I'm not. I still think it's important to keep that open for people as a way to explore. And then also, like, I'm going to get a little bit idealistic here too, but also as like an imaginative space. Like I think about a lot of queer fiction. This maybe not necessarily in the world of horror, but I'm thinking about like more, I don't know, utopian utopian science fiction, that sort of thing. Like just thinking about like the power of writing about, you know, queer characters who live in worlds where, you know, they can be fully themselves and that sort of thing. I don't know. I'm thinking about like just some cool science fiction writers who have done that sort of thing. And oh, go ahead.
No, I was saying, was it you that's reading Gideon the Ninth right now?
Yes. Yeah.
Wait, what is it? I gotta write it down.
Oh, you'd love it, Pat. You'd love this book. It's so funny. It's so good.
It's so good.
How do you
really well written.
I'll send it to you in a little bit.
All right, cool.
But yeah, I just think, you know, it's a space to explore aspects of yourself that maybe you don't feel comfortable expressing publicly, and it's also a space to imagine new worlds. And I think to police and shut that out is a mistake. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know what's interesting is, Brennan, I don't know if you're thinking this, but when we had our second round table amongst them was Gabino Iglesias, and he was talking about the Latino or Black experience, and he's like, he started laughing. He's like, there's so many. There could be the Black guy from the Bronx, the Black Jamaican from, you know, somewhere else, and he starts listing off all these things. He goes, there's not one experience. So it's really interesting that is true for like pretty much all groups. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I can't remember who mentioned, I think Sofia, you mentioned it. One person can't speak for the entire group. I think that's really important, because with social media, you kind of get lost in the moment, and you kind of take certain people's word for doctrine. Like, I'm a cis white dude, so if I hear one thing and I'm newer, I'm going to be like, oh, they're smart, I'll probably just listen to them. But like talking to people of different walks of life, you know, you guys are all, you come from different places and stuff, so it's really interesting to just hear what everyone has to say. Brennan, why don't you jump in, man, with a question?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I love the discourse going on right now with the idea of authors, you know, sometimes feeling like it's not my story to tell. And I would say this applies tangentially, but, you know, we were having a panel discussion a few weeks ago about disabled children. And I mentioned that, you know, one thing I would do is write an autistic character from first person, but not really with any intention of marketing that. Sophia, you specifically mentioned, when an author is writing queer characters, they've got to kind of question, why am I choosing this character?
Mhm.
And if it's because I think I can get into this anthology I couldn't otherwise get into, maybe that's not the best choice. And I do really love the idea of fiction as an avenue to explore different perspectives. And I don't think there's anything wrong with writing a character that is incredibly different from your perspective, but without really any eye to show that experience to the rest of the world, to write it just to see, what do I really think? Let me sit down at a computer and just, blow my thoughts all over the page. Not a question, just, a thought. I do kind of want to go back to the original topic though, which was making all your queer characters very, friendly and family friendly and happy and safe. So I'm wondering, what are your perspectives? What are, if the market gets oversaturated with these safe characters, what are the dangers in your personal opinions? Eric, let's throw it to you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We're all too excited. I mean, the danger is that, people who are outside the community, they see that and they think that there is only one real way to be queer, or if they are queer and in the closet, or just less out maybe, then some of their peers, they might think, again, there's only one way to be queer, and then they might not feel like they truly belong or feel comfortable coming out. So I think that it is important, I'm sure everyone here would agree, it's important to go ahead and show the full gamut of human experience, and that queer people go through the same stuff that everyone else goes through. We're not monsters or anything. We're just people.
I would add though, like, let us be monsters. We want to
Hell
be
yeah.
monsters too. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Eric, what type of monster would you be if you could be any monster?
Oh, man, I'd be some sort of cryptid, I think.
That's not the right answer. You're a bird.
Okay. I'll be a
Bird cryptid.
some sort of monstrous bird. Ooh, I'd be a cassowary. Cassowaries will wreck your day.
And for anyone that doesn't know it, Eric's obsessed with birds. That's why I said it. I wanted to see if he would say
Pat
that.
wants to go bird watching with me.
I do.
Let's go
Man.
bird.
I would love that.
We're gonna make that happen soon.
Yes.
But I think on the topic of, like, letting us be monstrous, I think that's just as important to humanizing us as, like, showing, like the gays in the suburban cul-de-sac. I think it's just as important, because, like, if you only show one side of a group of people, I don't know, I think that's kind of messed up. Like, it's important to see a person for all their sides, and, like, allow them to explore those parts themselves that are maybe a little bit darker. And I think that also, like, to only have these sanitized visions, like, it's always going to be a moving goalpost. Like, if they being, like, dominant cultural forces see that we are willing to assimilate in this way, they'll see how far they can push it until like, essentially we're assimilated into non-existence, or assimilated to the point where, like, queerness means nothing. And it's just basically obliterated. So in the interest of self-defense, I think it is important that we be allowed to be monsters. That's me being a little bit, like, over the top, but I don't know. Yeah.
No, it's not.
I agree with that. I find, like, this follows a lot of the same narrative trajectories as, like, Pride Parade. The same kinds of dialogues have been going on, where it was like, you can't be queer, to all right, you can be queer, but keep it to yourself. And then it's like, all right, you can be open, but don't do queer stuff. Yeah. And it's like, that same narrative has been transposed onto queer content that queer artists are creating. And it creates this duality between these, like, mega monolith monopolies like Disney and Netflix, and what sort of queer representation they have. And a lot of the times there isn't any queer representation, and it's like they get away with queer baiting. when I was a teen, I was like shipping Yu-Gi-Oh characters together. I was wishing I was Aladdin. There's no need for Disney, in their opinion, to show any sort of queer representation because fans will do the legwork for them, right? And so I think there really needs to be this push for support of queer indie artists because it's real authentic stories that are being told. And they're being told in so many different facets. It's honestly, like, in my opinion, I believe that it's okay for a toxic queer relationship to be shown in a story if it's being told by a queer artist, whether or not that's based on their own personal experience. I think what's often conflated is that portrayal of those sorts of characters, of like the monstrous or the queer people as monstrous, is not an endorsement of that sort of narrative. You're just showing that kind of character, you're just showing those kinds of relationships. And if you're not into that, then you can find representation of happy, wholesome, cul-de-sac, like you said, queer relationships out there. But there are these like complex queer stories being told, and you can have them both, right? Like there's a whole gray area. So I find that this like sanitization and weird policing around what kind of queer stories are like allowed to be told, or are like toxic. It's like, to who, like who's the intended audience? Because this comes up a lot in horror, and it's like horror has always been the space to explore the other, and horror is supposed to be horrifying. So I don't know, putting that like power back into the hands of queer authors, I think, is more empowering than anything.
There's so many great that me and Brennan, I'm gonna speak from this. You guys, Haley Piper, Eric LaRocca. There's just so many good pieces of fiction today that you can explore. Like,
It really is.
as long as you're in the Twitterverse or whatever, it's hard to escape it. And just for whoever's listening and hasn't even explored it yet, you gotta just dive in. Eric, I gotta ask, what the hell happened to you on a cul-de-sac?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's just like my mind, whenever I think of sanitized queerness, I always think of like, and I don't even watch the show, but I think of Modern Family, that like ABC show or whatever. It's just like, oh, okay, this was like them testing the waters with queer characters who are just about as assimilated as possible.
Okay.
Who are like vaguely like upper middle class, who I don't think they actually live on a cul-de-sac in the show, but it feels like they would. That's why I keep referencing it, because Modern Family is my reference for sanitized.
Because I grew up in suburbia Massachusetts on a cul-de-sac, and I'm like, there was no awesome queerness. There's just the sanitized stuff that you were mentioning. So I'm a little nervous that you spied on me as a child. Now I don't know.
I really don't know anything about suburbs other than that they're just exceedingly boring and a drag to drive through, and they have too much sprawl and they should be annihilated. That's all I know.
My parents are moving this year. You know what, Bri, on the subject of sanitized queerness, I would love it. You don't have to go over the whole thing, but your article on Candyman, I think, actually applies here.
It's a good article.
But yeah, it pushes a lot of boundaries. Or you could just, if you don't mind, talk about Candyman and what it means to you. That's your article. So why don't you talk about your article?
Yeah,
trying to word it another way.
Sure. So Candyman is one of those films that I watched at exactly the right time. I was kind of in a place where, I'd spent several years kind of questioning my identity and debating who I was and who I was into. I grew up very conservative Christian. So all my life I heard, if you're queer, you're going to hell. If you're literally anything other than cisgender and straight, you're going to hell. So all my life I kind of tried to fight that. And then around 2015, when I saw Candyman for the first time, like I was at the perfect place to sort of dig into that. And part of how that movie made me realize that I was actually queer is that I was attracted to Tony Todd, but then I was also attracted to Virginia Madsen, and it was the exact same. And I never before been in a scenario where there were two people that I was equally attracted to that were, different genders, or different gender presentations. So I kind of had to confront that. And I kind of drew some parallels between myself and Virginia Madsen's character, Helen, in the movie, because she's kind of enamored with the Candyman and she wants to learn more about him and spend more time with him. And, you know, whether or not she actually loves him is debatable, but there's this attraction, and so many people, you know, are questioning that, and they think it looks one way from the outside when it's completely different on the inside. And like I said, I could kind of relate to that, because I had felt that it was fine to love anyone. Just in my gut feeling was that, you know, you can love someone whether they're this gender or that gender or no gender or all genders. It doesn't really matter. So I had to go with what I knew was right in my gut rather than sort of what I had been brought up to believe. So for me, seeing Candyman was kind of the thing that helped me like step into my own. And I'm not saying like I wouldn't have come out if I hadn't watched Candyman, but it did help.
I mean, a man with that much control over bees is just he's extremely hot. I mean,
Erotic.
Tony Todd. What a voice, too.
It's
He
the hook.
does.
The hook.
I'm telling you guys, even as a straight man, I'm like, I don't know, Tony, kind of turning me.
The bone structure alone. Like from an
Handsome guy.
artistic point of view, you gotta admit.
Oh.
Feels like that episode of The Office where they're like, is she hot? And then they're just dissecting the dimensions of her cheeks and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's great. Tony Todd's a very good looking man.
By the way, Reed,
I don't know where to go from here.
I was not joking to take any power away from your article
Oh,
or
yeah, no.
your thoughts about it. I just wanted to add, you know, but my silly, stupid thought that Tony Todd is a very handsome man.
Yes. Well, I obviously agree. So
So, Brennan, how about you stare us, buddy? Because I'm lost.
Yeah, sure. No, I think I loved reading that. I thought it was very interesting to be able to identify a catalyst, like a very specific moment, a turning point, if you will. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time to write that up and for letting us host it.
thank you.
I want to kind of go the opposite direction of sanitized queerness. I mean, you Eric, you talked about how horror has this history of, you know, creating, let's say, messy characters, but it also definitely has a history of villainizing, demonizing queer characters. So I wonder, what are, you know, whether historically or even up to modern times, what are some of the more harmful things that, you know, you would personally would like to see out of here?
I think as far as things that I'd like to see out of here, the notion that queer people are sexually predatory. I think that's been especially toxic with like trans bathroom narratives. Yeah, that shit sucks. It just thoroughly sucks, and nothing of it is backed up by anything resembling like facts or reality. And I don't know that it's something that I've seen a whole ton in horror. Like I can think of maybe a couple examples, but that is one of those pieces that I think like, well, you know, yes, I want us to be able to explore queer villainy in interesting ways, but I don't want to see over and over this notion that I guess queer people are sexual predators and that you got to protect your children, you got to you know, protect the women, that sort of thing. I think that's just nasty.
That's a good point.
I would tend to agree with that. Definitely. Like, I was thinking about this earlier today in preparation. Like, what were queer characters that I had seen in horror growing up? And then sadly, my mind landed on like Hitchcock's Psycho and Silence of the Lambs. And they both speak to exactly what Eric was saying, where it's this devious, sexual, predatory, you know, experience that's specifically tied to their queerness. So I would like to see us go away from that narrative, you know, or look at it from a different lens, certainly.
And I think, Sophia, it's so complicated too, because I love both of those films,
Mhm.
but I also like acknowledge the ways in which they can be pretty harmful. Like I remember seeing, I don't remember what documentary it was, but it was something about like the reception of Silence of the Lambs when it came out, and how a lot of queer groups were deeply angry about, you know, the portrayal of Buffalo Bill and that sort of thing. And but yeah, both films are awesome, and both films are like really complicated. There's stuff to chew on there.
Red Dragon got some heat too, man, for mental health with what's his name? Something Dollarhide.
Francis.
Thank you, Francis Dollarhide.
I just reread it. That's the only reason I remember.
Yeah, I mean that's a tight rope to walk when you're dealing with triggers like that. Does anyone else have anything to jump into what Eric was talking about or answering? Okay. Brennan, I'm going to give it to you one more time, and then I'll take over with a question if you don't mind.
Sure. So, all right. So I'm wondering, let's say you've got a writer in the Twitterverse, as Pat phrased it earlier, and they, you know, have met some really excellent people. You know what? I'm just going to throw my name in the ring here, because I grew up in a very white, sheltered community. And I will tell you, I have met more, you know, a bigger variety of people in the last 2 years of my life that just, you know, blow up what it looks like where I live. Made some people that I consider friends from the LGBTQ community, just, you know, and it's very eye-opening. So let's say that you have a writer in my shoes who wants to work that representation into their work. How should that writer approach research? Because obviously we want to do it in a respectful manner.
If it's okay if I start, I'm thinking about, I have a friend who, her job is, or at least one of her jobs is, reviewing people's Google searches and seeing like how accurate the results are. And oftentimes there are very like oddball questions that come out. Like people Googling things that if they said it out loud would be maybe deeply embarrassing to them, or if they like ask them in public or something like that. But I think like, I don't think Google is a perfect vehicle for, you know, learning about queerness, but I do think it's like, it's a good starting point. I think like, you know, with any of these things, like search engines that have algorithms driven on engagement, you know, sometimes it's going to lead you astray and that sort of thing. Like think about stories of people who go down YouTube rabbit holes and then suddenly like, you know, a few days later it's recommending like Ben Shapiro and you know, nonsense like that. And so I mean, I think what I'm saying there in sort of a long-winded way is be careful with online research, and it's a useful tool, but it might also be worth, in conjunction with that, talking to queer people, you know, and saying like, hey, you know, I'm curious about this. I've been doing a little research on this. Just wanted to double check. Like, if you wouldn't mind, do you have a couple seconds to like talk about this thing? Or like, can I ask you a couple questions about it? Personally, as a queer person, if either of y'all ever did that, wouldn't be offended at all. I'd be happy to help with what I guess a little expertise I have. I don't feel like I have enough expertise, especially on things like history, but yeah, I think, you know, coupling honest online research with human communication for people who are in the community.
I agree. I think also potentially hiring a sensitivity reader as something that has come up a lot more recently in the Twitterverse, to just get feedback from, you know, someone that's part of that community, to really see, again, no one can give you a blank check to write whatever it is you want to write, but it might give you feedback onto a perspective that you wouldn't have necessarily thought about. Also, maybe trying to find a queer editor to work with, and looking at like the representation, like, is it a bad representation? Like, is it perpetuating a stereotype? If it is, what does that say? So like, for instance, I consider myself queer, I'm genderqueer, I'm also bi, but the manuscript that I spent the last like 2 years working on in the end, this might be spoilers, but one of the main two queer characters dies. It is a zombie novel. There's like a lot of characters that die. And I struggled for a really long time trying to figure out within myself, am I perpetuating the stereotype of bury your gaze, which is where queer characters, they never get the happy ending at the end. If there's always going to be one queer partnership, and it always ends in flames, kind of thing. So I put that project aside for a really long time, and the more I sort of revisit thinking about that narrative, the more I think about how that like character death needs to happen, because it's part of the bigger theme or like narrative that's going on in that story. So I think sometimes it's okay to have to lean into these sort of things. Obviously, again, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself and the stories that I'm telling. But I'm not trying to glorify that sort of narrative in any way. It's just, helps tell the story that I'm trying to tell, and the characters so happen to be queer. So I hope that helps answer a little bit. I went on a tangent, but
Brianna, I want to throw it to you in a minute, but Sophia, I think that's so tied to the overall theme of sanitizing the characters, because if you you back down from what you feel like needs to happen in that manuscript, your story ends up being not as strong, and arguably the representation ends up being not as strong, because it's just the punch is pulled, and the audience is going to be able to tell the punch is pulled. That's my 2 cents on it anyway. Brianna.
Yeah, I would just add that it's all about intention, going off what Eric said. If you have questions, don't be afraid to reach out to people, even if you think it might be a stupid question, as long as your heart is in the right place and you are asking from a place of genuinely wanting to know more and understand. I think that's fine. I'm speaking for myself, but I don't think any queer person would have a problem, for the most part, with you approaching them openly and asking, for their honest experience, and being open to listening and changing your story if you do have that problematic representation.
Pat, did you want to jump in with something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Sophia if that's her debut novel that she's working on. I'm curious about it.
it was for a really long time, but I find, man, there's so much pressure put on the title of like a debut novel. I'm like, maybe I'll get my feet wet with a novella or something. And it's also like, it's the first like feature length, novel that I ever wrote. And I started writing it in 2016 or 2017. So I can see how far along my writing skills have gone. Like, thank God, it'd be a problem if I was like, this is great, like years later. But it went through, I worked with Jess Landry, who is an excellent editor, and it went through a beta reading process, and I've stepped back away from it for a little bit, because I'm like, I want to make these like massive structural changes that aren't just like line edits anymore. So I'd like to come back to it, because my heart, I love zombies. I love zombie novels. I love zombie films. I really want that to be either my first or second sort of like published story, if I'm so lucky. But yeah,
queer
little zombie story.
This wasn't even unintentional, but a quick segue: Where the Dead Go to Die. It's written by 2 queer men, and it's
is that the Aaron Dries
and Mark Allen Gunnels.
Yeah. I wanted to read that.
I bet that's good.
It's a zombie book, but it's just so much more. Like
writing this down. My brand. This is up my alley.
We read it for the season finale of season 1, the past December, and I had my boy the month before that, my first kid, and that's all I'm gonna say. Like, God damn you two, you guys fucked me up for life for this. While we're on the subject, though, I'm going back to you, Sophia, with writing. You had some good news this year, not last year, I think, with your first sold story. I would love it if you could promote that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I wrote, I guess over like COVID last summer, a little short story called The Arborglyph. It is also a queer body horror story. And it got picked up by Max Booth for the Lost Contact anthology, which I believe comes out
Nice.
in August. So getting to work with him was really, really exciting, especially since his plate has been like so full with everything going on right now.
Yeah.
But I'm so excited for like people to see, I don't know, my little treasure.
Oh,
It
Sophia,
was
that
very
name is-
validating.
That title is super cool. I really like it.
Thank you.
And while we're on it, because authors for some reason don't like to be shameless for the most part, let's move on to Bri. And then we'll jump back to the main theme. But while we're at it, come on, you put out like 4 books last year.
Yeah, I didn't have anything else to do. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but like I lost my job last May, maybe April. I don't know. And I had a lot of these projects I had, they were already like mostly written. So I definitely didn't like write and publish 3 books in the same year. It looks like I did, but I had a bunch of half-finished things that I just finally sat down and I was like, well, I guess if I can't leave the house, I might as well fix this plot hole. I had done basically everything else but fix the plot hole. So I decided it was time to do that. I don't think I'll be doing that this year because it's already June and I don't have anything out.
Hey, that's not a bad thing. You got a pretty good readership from what I can tell, so that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
You can publish 5 books next year, Bri.
I'm just gonna double it every year, and then,
Oh my
Perfect.
god!
And then if I die, I'll just get famous posthumously.
There you go. Gabe will live off of your riches.
Out in a blaze of glory.
Eric, now it's time for you to talk about yourself. Tell us about your podcast. Tell us about your books.
Oh, okay. I run Curse Morsels, which is a podcast with interviews and discussions about horror fiction and weird fiction. And I mostly focus on short fiction, so novellas and short stories. Bri has been on the show. And beyond that, I've edited, or I should say co-edited Pearl Iscariot, which Brennan's story was in. It's an anti-capitalist horror collection, or a horror anthology. And then I'm editing Antifa Splatterpunk this summer, which is exactly what it sounds like. Anti-fascist splatterpunk stories. That's gonna be really fun. And I'm kind of having a year like Bri you had last year, where I'm putting out a lot of stuff. So yeah, I've got my collection, my personal collection coming out in September, Nightmare Yearnings. And then yeah, I'm just gonna like collapse into a heap and chill for a while. I think that's the plan. But yeah, I mean that's the main stuff that I've been doing. It's been a pretty busy year, but I'm almost done with collection 2 as well. And who knows what will happen with that.
Well, good luck, man. Oh, what about that tick story? That thing, you sell
yeah. Well, so actually, I have a little side story about that, if it's okay. It is related to the topic, the Sanitized Queerness one.
Go for it. It's awesome.
So
no, wait, tell the plot first of the story.
Okay. I won't give away too much, but it involves ticks, it involves conversion therapy, and it involves lots of blood. I'll just say that. Those
Triple threat.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. But that story, when we kind of set up this panel, it sort of inspired me. I was like, God, I want to write some really messy queer characters. And I'd been working on this one for a while. And in the first draft, it was like completely different. And it was like 15,000 words long. It was just too long. It was all over the place. And in that one, they were a little more sanitized, like not like completely, they were characters who had flaws and they had like complicated things going on in their lives. But in this draft, I was very intentional about wanting to explore messiness in a way that was, I guess, looking at it neutrally Like it's not intended to be condemned. It's not intended to be celebrated. Like, make of it what you will, reader. Like, I want a story in which characters are allowed to be vulnerable. They're allowed to be violent. They're allowed to be liars. They're allowed to hate their parents. They're allowed to, do all these things that maybe someone will look on and be like, oh my goodness, this is abysmal. This is awful. But I don't know. I think that's important. And I think those stories are worth telling. And the characters are people who are still worthy as people, even though they're fictional and don't actually exist.
Well, speaking of people that do exist that are in the LGBT community, is, in my opinion, the smartest human was in that, and that's Leonardo da Vinci. He invented, you name it, everything, and also vegetarian. So I don't know if you guys knew that, because I found that out last year. I'm like, that's fucking cool.
The day I learned.
I want to jump, if you guys don't mind, because we're talking about pros, but I would actually like to, and we talked a little bit about films already, but I'd like to pick your brains, and it doesn't have to be just in horror, it could be in fiction in general. What are your thoughts on where queer representation is going now with current films? Whoever wants to go. Eric.
Okay. All right. I have a thought. This is something I've talked to my partner about, and we will oftentimes watch like shows on it. Mostly it's Netflix. It seems like Netflix is the biggest offender in this regard, where there will be ostensibly positive queer representation, but it's so preachy. It's like, this is the good thing. Like, homophobia is bad. Here's our homophobia is bad scene. And it's just so boring. It's just so boring. And so, like, I'm glad that, there are queer characters in these roles, and that sometimes these queer characters are allowed to be messy. But and maybe I'm guilty of this too sometimes in my own fiction, because I certainly have moments in which it's like, homophobia is bad. But I don't know. I think I see signs of, I guess, positive representation, but I would like to see it move away from the need to preach, the need to bestow values upon viewers and readers and that sort of thing. I would like to see more of, I guess, more fiction and more movies and TV shows that just trust readers and viewers to make those judgments themselves, and just treat people as human beings.
How about you, Bri?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there are some great shows out with queer representation. I definitely feel like it's going in the right direction, and we've definitely come a long way from where we were. But like Eric said, there's still a lot that needs to be done. I've noticed a lot of, in particular, homosexual male representation tends to be the most common representation that I've seen in media when people try to include queer representation. And a lot of times that is, a gay white kid, and that's it. And that's like the only queer kid you see in the whole thing. And it's like, anyone can be queer, anyone can have this experience, and it's not just limited to this one type of person. And I think that's probably the thing I would change when it comes to representation of queer people in the media, is that there needs to be more diversity within the community.
Yes.
I agree. It's also so funny to me when I see queer characters represented, particularly in this like sanitized, Netflixy sort of universe that they've built, where it's always like the token queer couple, and it's like a lot of the times queer people tend to have friendship groups within themselves. So it's bizarre to me to see like they're hanging around all these like straight people. But one of the shows that really struck me, that I watched first last year, was Euphoria, and it has this excellent queer representation that is very messy and real, and shows all of the beautiful, tragic, horrifying, grotesque experiences and feelings around being young and being queer, and there's all sorts of different characters that are portrayed on this show. And to my knowledge, the creator, Sam Levinson, speaks directly with the actors. So there is a trans woman that plays on that show, and they spoke with them directly to really get some feedback on the type of story that they were going to build together. So it became more of a collaborative role. I would love to see more of that sort of thing being told, because it's one thing to have these sanitized queer stories being shown, and it's another for who is creating these stories behind the scenes. Are the directors queer? Are the directors like people of color and such? Like, it's like what Brianna was saying, like I also want to see intersectionality. There's a lot of like white queer stories that are being told, and there's so much more that's out there, including all these like messy, fun, stories that we're missing out on.
This is a great show that I just thought of that my wife and I love. I think it's ending now with 3 seasons, and Pose, and for anyone that hasn't seen it,
I want to watch that. Yeah,
it's so good.
It's for those that haven't seen it or even know what it is. It's set in the 80s in New York, where it's basically these groups of like balls for everyone in the LGBTQ community, but they're also dealing with AIDS crisis, and there's transgenders in there, there's gay men, there's very few white people in this too, which makes it all the more different. And the shit they go through, it's fucked up. It really, if you have a heart, it hurts to listen and view this. An actor I really likes in it, Billy Porter. He plays basically the MC for all the balls, and he's funny as hell. Well, sometimes he's sad, but it's a great show. So I wanted to throw that in there. If anyone hasn't heard of it yet, it's on Netflix. Eric, I would think that would hopefully counterbalance some of those.
I think so. I think it helps that it's a queer creator. Although Ryan Murphy, I think Ryan Murphy's the creator, right?
Yeah, and
he's a complicated guy.
That's awesome. I believe that the trans actors they're actually transgender people. Yeah. So that's pretty damn cool.
Nice. I'm gonna check that one out.
If you do, let me know what you think. Brennan, do you have another question, sir? Or shall I continue?
No, go ahead.
Anyway, all right. I want to throw it to Bri. Bri, what do you want to talk about next?
I mean, there's this one aspect of queer representation that I have seen as a queer woman, and it is the idea of I feel like every queer relationship I see that involves 2 women or 2 feminine presenting people, they're always like lipstick lesbians. They're always very feminine, very traditionally, girly and all that. And it's like there's that ideal, and then which is kind of fetishized to a certain extent. And then there's, the really butch lesbians. And oftentimes they are portrayed as predatory, and obviously that's a huge problem. And I don't know, I really want us to move away from that, because like Sofia was saying, we need more intersectionality, and we need to really understand that there are people from all walks of life who can be queer, and just because someone looks one way doesn't mean they're queer or they're not queer. And there's really no way of knowing unless you ask the person what their identity is. And if they decide not to tell you, then there's nothing you can do. It's none of your business at that point.
It's a fair way to look at it. I want to throw in a book that it's about 2 women that meet on back in 2000, meet in a you know where I'm going with this.
We all do.
I'll just say it. The title, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke.
Yeah.
Eric LaRocque was unfortunately not able to make this episode, but he's also here with us in spirit. It is a book about 2 women that meet in a queer chat room or what is it back then?
Forum.
Boards? Forum.
It's like AOL or something. Or Queer Forum and then AOL
Yeah, so
Oh,
they
yeah.
talk.
Messenger or whatever.
They meet on a forum, and somehow Eric makes an apple peeler interesting. So that was great. But they end up talking through just email and AIM and AOL Instant Messenger for you youngins out there. But did everyone read that story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that real quick? Because that definitely applies to this
Oh, yeah.
conversation.
Everyone,
100%.
everyone has
Okay.
read that story.
I'm so glad everyone in
I
this room has read it. That's beautiful.
I mean,
Yes.
I saw the other day, I think that it was like the number 300 book on Amazon, like not horror, not LGBTQ horror book, period.
Yes.
Well earned, for
That's
sure.
pretty fucking wild.
Mhm.
Actually, I think it really applies to something we were talking about earlier, because even though it's got, mostly universal, rave reviews, Eric has gotten a little pushback to people who assume that he is a straight white man and that he had no right to write a lesbian relationship.
Mhm.
Thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
I mean, I've been taking a look at the Goodreads reviews on his work, just as someone who I used to work in the sex work industry. So a lot of the, lower star ratings discussed a lot of like the representation of BDSM in his work and how it somehow meant that he was insinuating that these lesbian characters were toxic, or it was like endorsing this like evil view of people who participate in BDSM or lesbian relationships, and that as a cis man, he's not allowed to write either of those, which I think is hilarious. It's so bizarre to me that marginalized authors are held to this like higher standard than any other sort of like larger companies telling stories. Having read the story myself, I don't understand why there's like this demand for moral punity around it. It's a horror novel. I think that the horror was very effective, and these two characters happened to be lesbians. They do talk about, their background briefly. But I think, I don't know, it's just so ridiculous to me, this like feedback and how aggressive it is. And it's like this weird dogpiling.
What
I
about
think
that?
it's also. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, you go.
Okay. I think
your
it's
show,
also. It strikes me as strange too when people mistake the representation of a thing for the endorsement of that thing.
Exactly.
And thankfully, I don't know anyone in real life who does that. Well, actually, that's a lie. I'm a teacher. I have had some students who have had the experience of. Well, I'll give the example of. Oh gosh, what was the story? I'm forgetting it now. I think it might have been actually Ballad of Black Tom, and there were some students who were like, "Oh, this book is so racist," and I was like, "Well, I think we need to differentiate. What is the difference between the portrayal of characters who are racist and the endorsement of that actual racism?"
Exactly.
And when I had that conversation with that student, they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense." And obviously, the internet is not the greatest place to have that conversation. It's not like it oftentimes, as beautiful as a resource as the internet is, it is not the best vehicle for learning sometimes. Yeah, but I do take issue with folks who assume that simply because something is portrayed and then not necessarily commented on one way or the other, like where the author says this is bad or like this is good, that the author is implicitly endorsing that thing. I think that's like stupid.
Did you tell him who wrote it?
What's that?
Did you tell him?
Sadie did. Sadie was like, well, for me, I like to read fiction.
Oh, I meant his students. Did you tell him who Victor Laval is?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. Yeah. They like,
Yeah.
They got it. It clicked.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. There's this like also weird weaponization, and like discomfort that is being used to silence artists. So one of the other topics that has kind of come up in the Twitterverse as well is like do we put trigger warnings on work? Particularly around horror, because horror lives and thrives in what is traumatic, and what is gory and what is intense. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of different thoughts and feelings around that. But I saw there was some folks that were discussing how these like separate entities that label works by queer authors have been used against them in the past. So if we look at the MPAA, obviously, depictions of like women on women relationships versus like a straight relationship, one of them is going to be way more censored than the other, even to the point of getting like an NC-17 rating, where it's like American Pie, yeah, like a dude can jerk off in a fucking pie in the like trailer, and that's totally fine. I'm of the opinion that trigger warnings are fine if the author wants to put them in. It's a nice thing to have, and it can be put, at the start of the book discreetly. And I know there's like a couple databases online. However, from what I've seen, they're not always accurate. They'll be like, there's animal death in this book, and then the author's like, no, there isn't. So I don't know. It's there's a lot going on there.
I think I've seen some people talk about that specifically on Storygraph, which is like I think that site is a cool alternative to Goodreads.
Mm-hmm.
It's not owned by Amazon, and it has some interesting features that I think are useful. But that is one of those that I think is a little bit concerning, where it does take some of that control out of the hands of a queer author, or the hands of the publisher. And there are some folks who are a bit disingenuous with it, or I'm being Midwestern about it, who are extremely disingenuous about it, and seem to do that in a way that does weaponize, those types of warnings in a really bad faith, completely inaccurate sort of way against queer authors' work.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, I got a question specifically for you, man. I've never been even close to where you live. What's the reception like out there on a day-to-day basis, never mind fiction, for people that aren't, straight? Is it accepting where you live?
Well, let me tell you about Nebraska. There was millions of gay farmers eating corn straight off the cob.
I've never noticed that. You don't.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm a TV speak Midwestern.
You're phony.
No, I think in Nebraska, I mean, it's not. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I can only speak from my incredibly subjective experience, and then I guess the experience of friends of mine I've talked to. But generally, Nebraska's not horrible, at least in Lincoln, which is where I live. It's I don't want to say like a slightly bigger city because it's only like 300,000 people, but it's big enough that like generally, if you are queer, you can live here and be relatively fine. That said, I mean, Sophia, you mentioned like intersectionality. Like I have friends who are queer and Black, or who are like gender non-conforming in ways that are very like not stereotypically Midwest, who have had much harder times living in Nebraska than someone like I kind of like Bri. I'm in, and so I can go out without any problem essentially. But I have had some friends who have had a much harder time with this place, to the point where one friend has mentioned that like Nebraska is kind of a worse place to be queer than areas of the South where this friend lived previously, which really surprised me. And maybe that's just me having some stereotypical assumptions about the South, but yeah.
Does anyone want to jump in? All right, Brennan, what do you got, buddy? I'm leaning on you heavy today.
All right. So let's completely change the subject, sort of. So when you are writing a story, and Sophia, just a heads up, I'm gonna throw it to you first. Eric keeps jumping on and cutting in line.
So Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding with you, man. Eric gets thrown the question because everybody's very quiet. So when you're writing a story, how does representation figure into your writing, or how organically, how much thought, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but how much thought do you put into the way you're portraying your characters versus just letting them kind of come out, so to speak, on the page, and the way they interact with everybody else around them?
Definitely for I'll speak to like queer characters to start off with. I can't see myself ever writing like a straight protagonist. That definitely goes back to like when I was a kid, I would constantly just read books that had male protagonists because I felt seen in that narrative. I like felt uncomfortable reading, female protagonists most of the time. So I think just for me as an author, I want to write the stories that I want to read, first and foremost. And that might sound very self-indulgent, but more and more there are stories that I like to see out in the world that have queer representation, but there's still a lot missing. You know what I mean? There's this huge hole, particularly in horror. And I'm like, I want to see the like craziest queer horror shit ever. I love this genre so much, and they work together so beautifully. And there's so much to be explored there. There's so much to be said there. But if I look at, other sort of marginalized characters, they usually come out on the page from what I've written in the past. But then I'll usually do, a second or third pass where, again, I'll get like a sensitivity reader, or I'll speak to folks that are of that like racial background or religious background to get a little bit more experience. Not necessarily like a marginalized character, but the character from the debut that I was writing, that like zombie horror story, was in the Canadian Army. And so I spoke to someone that worked at the Canadian Army that helped people on mental health recoveries. And then one of my close cousins worked in the Canadian Army. He still does. And so I interviewed him for like over the series of months to really get a better idea, because I didn't want to like come up with shit that I was just like pulling out of my ass, you know what I mean? So I think just approaching it respectfully is the best way to go about it. There's always going to be places that like you're going to hit or miss, because you're creating a fictional character. Sometimes it'll be based on real things, sometimes it won't. But I think the beauty of it is that it is this like new thing that you've created. And if it is based on marginalized experiences or contains marginalized characters, then you're adding to the world. I don't think that there's anything bad about that,
That's a great point. You know what? I would like to take a moment to see if any of you have recommendations for other LGBTQ authors or books. Sophia, you want to go first?
Let me think. I just read Eric LaRocca. I'm currently reading Poppy Z. Bright's Drawing Blood. It has this very awesome, and it is a queer narrative as well. It has this really awesome quote at the start that says, "Art is not a mirror, art is a hammer." And I was thinking about that today while we were
I love that.
prepping for this, because I was like, art is both. It reflects and it also destroys, I really like The Scapegracers, which is a young adult, like witchy kind of The Craft style story. Maybe come back to me, because I gotta scour my brain for some more. I read a lot of Haley Piper, but I think a lot of folks in our community know about her work. Her short anthology was excellent. Yeah.
Bri?
I was gonna recommend Haley Piper first, so that's really funny. She's great. I mean, you could read just about anything by her and you'd be great. She has a little bit of everything. There's some cosmic horror in there. There's some, I don't really know what's going to happen with Queen of Teeth, but it seems like it probably has some body horror elements in it,
So
which
good.
I'm totally into.
Oh, you read it, Sophia?
No, I'm just obsessed with the art that Nick dated, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
so
yeah.
jealous.
There you go.
There it is.
I was like, it's gorgeous. I mean, honestly, there's so many good queer horror authors and authors writing queer horror right now that I think you can't go wrong if you pick up, you know, a little book by someone you've never heard and you decide to give it a chance. You might find your next favorite book or your next favorite author.
My first, not story, but introduction to longer form by Haley was The Worm and His Kings. I thought it was great.
So good.
It's so creepy, but the way that she touches on the cosmic aspect is what really gets me. I'm always interested to see how someone can convey just why this cult or place or what have you is connected to another thing that is too fucked up really to understand, almost impossible to understand, but you get an idea. And what she does with the music, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm glad this is a book because I'd shit myself right now. Brennan, Eric, sorry, I said Brennan.
I got a few recommendations. Carmen Maria Machado is like one of the greatest writers
True.
ever, just period. The Dream House is an excellent, very weird memoir of hers. The Low Woods is her graphic novel that came out, I think, a year or two ago, which is excellent as well. And Her Body and Other Parties is super weird and wonderful. Transmuted by Eve Harms, which I think is coming out next month, and Eve was supposed to be here with us, but was not able to. But yeah, that's really good if you like body horror, if you like stuff that's really cinematic, and it's a queer narrative as well. If you're more into like bizarro, I'm just like, by the way, I'm going through my like Goodreads list here. Even though I just shout on Goodreads, it is still useful as a cataloging tool.
Hey, random thought, but they should have like a Goodreads meets whatever the app is these days for dating, where you can swipe left or swipe right.
Yes, yeah,
that'd be fucking awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Be able to create a quick playlist or whatever, a read list or whatever you want to call it. All right, I'm done. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay. The other two I was going to recommend real quick: Winnie by Katie Michelle Quinn, which is about a gun that turns into a woman. It's a very strange story. It's a piece of bizarro that has like some old west, weird west elements, some really like horrific body horror. Is excellent. And then The Wingspan of Severed Hands by Joe Koch is just like so good.
I love that title.
I don't know how
So good.
how Joe maintains the level of prose that they do, but yeah, it's freaking nuts, and yeah, you can't go wrong. So
the interview you had with Joe was pretty neat, and the part that really sticks in my head still is when they were talking about how they want to see the transformation period because they don't really see that enough in prose. Or I can't remember if Joe said that they see it ever, or if it's very infrequent. And
you're talking about like the messy middle ground of transition in fiction. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
And that
I love that too.
That interests me on so many levels. I wanna read that. I want to know what that's like. And at the very least, everyone can at least relate to it on some extent, I would think, because as humans, especially when you're a teenager, I mean, you're going through some weird stuff. I know that's not the best comparison, but that's all I got. So I need to read more to understand a little bit more of that side of things. I'm floundering here. So Brendan, how about you save me, buddy?
I would throw TC Parker on that list definitely as well.
Yeah.
I actually have not read any of her more horror stuff. I've got Salt Blood sitting right over there. Press of Feathers, I hear great things about. I've read her 2 out of her 3 crime books, and they are awesome. They are really, really well written, and I would definitely recommend them to anybody.
That's great.
Okay, done saving you. Back to you.
No, that's all right. I'm gonna run through the ending bits, if you will. So
if you'd like, we could throw the question I asked to Sophia to Bri and Eric before you rudely cut them off. Would you like to do that?
Yeah.
So Bri, I'm going to throw it to you first. What
God.
goes into crafting your characters?
I feel bad because I know a lot of authors have like a specific process, but I kind of just like, I have the whole it sounds completely batshit probably to anyone who's not a writer, but I have the whole person like completely in my head. And I already know, like, I'm like, okay, this person just comes into my head like fully formed. I'm like, you know, she's a lesbian, she's Black, she lives in, I don't know, Detroit, she's going through this, and this is what she does for a living. Like, that's kind of how I get my characters, and then I discover more about them in my first draft. I don't use a worksheet or anything like that. For me, that kind of makes it feel too much like school, and then I won't actually write the thing. Then it just feels like having homework for the rest of my life. So I don't really have a process when it comes to creating characters.
Eric, how about you, buddy?
Oh, that's tough. I feel like it varies piece to piece. I mean, I generally do outlining of plot, and with that, I do like outlining of some basic character points. Like, I'll say this happens because this character wants this, or this character goes to this place because they have this intention. I feel like I have a super boring answer, and I also mainly write short stories, and so like oftentimes like a lot of the characterization I do is sort of pantsed in the moment, and like, ooh, this would be like an interesting thing to develop here, or it's like I guess honed and crafted and refined in the process of beta reading. I know like whenever I bump a piece to you, Brennan, or Pat, oftentimes I'll have character questions, and so again, this is not maybe an interesting answer, but like that's just how it works for me, at least for short fiction.
So as far as including queer characters, how much of a conscious decision is it versus, you know, how much do you just get partway into the story and say, okay, I guess so?
I think like a lot of the time it's just implicit for me that they're going to be queer in some way.
Bingo.
And I don't know. I mean, like it just feels right most of the time. It's just a gut feeling thing. And then sometimes I throw a token straight in there or something. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Give them some representation too.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
A little, a scrap.
You gotta have them straights in there, man. Did I interrupt?
No, you're
Or
okay
did I
now.
do it again? Okay. So I wanted to jump real quick for Sophia to plug one more thing. It's her jewelry. That's how I first saw her, with that Medusa ring. It's beautiful. I've looked through her gallery. I don't know what the proper term is.
Yeah, website.
Just tell us your website. Tell us about
Well,
it.
thank you. First of all, it's really generous.
What got you into it?
That's a good question. I was like working with my hands, and I don't know, I fell into it. I went to university for East Asian studies and women's studies, and before that in Quebec there's like a weird mandatory post high school pre-university college that you have to go to called CEGEP. And you have to like specialize in a certain program. I did graphic design, which helps a lot in like a bunch of different elements of my business, but started working for different people here and there. I was doing retail, and I was like, I hate working for other people. I want to die. So I started taking jewelry classes and wax sculpting, which is you're literally just like carving away at a piece of wax, and then you can cast that into fine metals, and started doing a couple different spooky things. I worked as a bench jeweler for someone in Montreal for like a month. I like quit my job. I was working at Sephora, I started working for this jeweler, and then she pieced out to move to London to be with her boyfriend, and she just like collapsed her brand like overnight. And I was like, oh shit, I don't know how I'm gonna live. So I started my brand in my parents' basement, and yeah, making a lot of story-oriented pieces. I like to joke that it's like fan art to like pre-existing pieces. Love letters is maybe more of like a poetic way of saying that, but a lot of the work that I create is inspired by pre-existing work. That's why I have pieces that are like a piece inspired by like the cipher from Kathy Koja, and like I have a piece that I made after reading Grind Your Bones to Dust from Nicholas Day, and I have a piece that I made in collaboration with Cassandra Kaw, who has an excellent book coming out in autumn called Nothing But Black Teeth, and it is just amazing, like mwah, chef kiss. So yeah, it was a really nice way to like bridge two things that I really enjoyed, because jewelry making was starting to become very tedious in a sense, because it was like very business oriented, and then I got to slide in certain elements of things that I enjoyed, like horror. So yeah.
We're gonna have Cassandra on for that book. I can't wait. That cover alone is
It's
It's
so
great.
haunting. Oh my gosh.
So
Everything
cool.
she writes is just phenomenal, like gory
And
deliciousness.
she's just like, from what I've gathered following her for the last few months, she's just this like nice person that loves talking about like really nice stuff, but then she writes really
Fucked up, yeah.
clever things.
Plus, like the big nerd in me is like, you worked on a Dungeons and Dragons book. That's ridiculously amazing. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were a D&D fan, Erica.
Cha.
Cha.
One last thing is I'd like to ask about this, Sophia. So you collaborate with authors. If an author wants to collaborate with you, is that possible? If so, how can they do it?
Abso-fucking-lutely. I'll like reach out, I'll like slide into people's DMs sometimes. I'm like, hey, I saw an excerpt that you posted. If you ever want merch, hit me up. But yeah, if we're mutuals, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love doing things like beta reading. I love helping promote people's work in any way whatsoever. The horror community is so wonderful. Like, despite all the bullshit that we've just talked about and like how garbage sphere Twitter is, I have met and like discovered some of the most amazing people on that forum. So I like truly am really thankful for that experience. And yeah, I love working together with people on things, because designing jewelry can be a really isolating experience. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, I am happy to make merch. I am happy to make anything for release dates. So including the folks that are here.
That's awesome. We're gonna run through a few normal wrap up things, and then we'll go to final thoughts. So think about whatever you guys want to talk about one more time. And if you, listener, want to check out any of those articles, any reviews by Brennan, myself, or other guests, or you want to go to the store to check out merch with my face on a mask, which you can still buy masks now with my mug, get it on a coffee mug, notebook, other stuff like that. Go to deadheadspace.com, click on the store tab, and you can find out what I'm talking about. Where can people follow you? Eric, you first, mister.
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me through the streets of Lincoln, Nebraska, skulking behind trees, hiding behind,
Hey, what-
post boxes and that sort of thing.
What about a clown?
That's fine. Yeah. I'm
No,
okay with that.
remember, do you remember? Does anyone remember that? That just stopped being a thing. That used to be all over the country.
We did have some of that in Nebraska at the time. I think it was 2016. There
It
were
was
some
2016.
clowns who were
Yeah.
standing outside of. It wasn't the school I was working at, but it was another school during class hours. Anyway, my real answer is you can follow me on Twitter. Eric Raglin 1992 is my username there, or at Cursed Morsels, also on Twitter. I am pretty receptive to just saying hi to folks and talking to you. And if you're a cool person, yeah, hit me up. I like cool people.
If you're not, you can hop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do not contact if you're not nice.
Yes.
What about you, Bri? Where can people follow you?
I'm just all over the damn place, but the two best places to find me are Twitter. I'm Bri Morgan Books on Twitter and Brianna Morgan Books on Instagram. Those are my two most common platforms, I guess.
Awesome. Sophia, what about you? Where can people follow you?
I am most active on Twitter. My handle is at Sofia Ajram. And if you like jewelry, I also make jewelry. And I have a Twitter. No, I don't. I have a Instagram jewelry account, and that is sophia.zakia.
Final thoughts. Let's start with Bri.
I mean, I don't think I have anything to say that we haven't already covered or that one of the other panelists has said more eloquently, but I definitely think it is important to keep talking about things like this and to keep questioning, you know, if the media is headed in a way that is going to be beneficial to people or harmful to people. Because if we don't analyze our own work and if we don't analyze the work of our peers, then, you know, we lose kind of control of where we're going as a society. And that's not to say that you should police people. I think we've gotten into that, but I don't know, it's tricky. It's a fine line. You have to keep looking at what you're doing and questioning what you're doing and if it's for the right reasons.
Perfect. Eric.
Yeah, I guess the last thought I'd give is I just want to reiterate the importance of allowing queer fiction to have queer characters who are monsters. I think that oftentimes, like, the role of the monster is to threaten some aspect of dominant society. And there are some aspects of dominant society that are absolutely worth threatening and destroying. So I think the role of the monster can be a socially important one, and to allow representation for that in literature, embrace it and see it as sort of an imaginative space for destroying things like, say, capitalism.
Oh, God damn it. You had to say that.
Then, yeah, I mean, I think it's worthwhile. So that's all I'll say there.
You were doing so good, man. A little over
I
an
know,
hour and a
I
half.
couldn't resist it.
It's okay. I love you, buddy. Sophia, what do you got? Anything?
Yeah, I would agree with what Eric said. I want to bring queer people back to the table. I love horror so much, like, and I think the older you get, the more you realize how, like, deeply a certain genre hits you from a really young age and how it helps form who you are and what your interests are. And I want to see myself in horror, and I want people who identify as queer to see themselves in horror, and I want people that are marginalized and have intersecting identities to see themselves in horror. And by having people within those communities write those stories, whether they be, you know, beautiful or monstrous, it normalizes them. And so having both of those exist is important, I think.
Brennan, I'll save you for last. I'm going to ask the question that other guys or girls in my position, straights, thumb straights. I'm going to ask you guys a question. If you're not comfortable with it, by all means, don't answer it. But queer was always a word growing up that was very derogatory. And recently, now I'm friends with, not that it's new for me because of Twitter, but now I'm more surrounded by it with fiction, that queer is heavily being used all the time. So my question is why is that? And is it acceptable in your three's opinion for everyone to use that term in that context that you guys use it in?
That's a loaded question.
Yep. All right, good night.
That's for you, listeners. All right.
Open interpretation.
I think, like a lot of different terms, it's about reclaiming a word that might have been used more offensively or more aggressively. For me, I had studied what was initially called women's studies in university, and queer came to be this umbrella term for sort of everything that was the other, for gender and sexuality. And I fall under the category of, like, bi and genderqueer. So I sort of fluctuate between all of these different identities. So it was a nice, I think there's comfort in finding a label or like a home for yourself. That's what a lot of bi people struggle with a lot of the time, is like, I'm not straight enough to be with the straights and I'm not gay enough to be with the queer community. But you are. And so having this like queer umbrella helps to shelter all of us. To go back to like whether or not, you know, cis straight people can use these terms, I think it's like, do you feel uncomfortable using that term? And if you do, like, let's unpack that a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Because yeah, I think it's just about you know, looking at that and then maybe talking to people in the queer community. I don't particularly have a problem with it. I think it's an apt nomer. It's very useful. So you know, it's not like you're saying like a queer, like so it's you know, it depends on context, it depends on conjugation, but you know, as a descriptor for like a certain type of narrative, I think it's super helpful.
That'd be so rude.
I know.
Yeah, don't do that. I would also add, you know, like Sophia touched on a little bit, intention matters. So if you notice that you're only using queer to describe maybe an aspect of otherness in regards to sexuality in a way that's like negative, you're gonna have to unpack that probably, but also like just be respectful how you're using it, I guess I would say. And I think that's probably basic knowledge and common sense, but it always pays to be nice.
I would echo what Sophia said about it being a useful umbrella term. I think that it does a lot to unite a lot of different identities that can be sort of like disparate at times. And, you know, a lot of people like have concerns about, you know, oh, when there are so many identities, like, you know, people, it just divides people further. I'm not going to get into that conversation because I don't particularly want to, and also I'm tired. But but I will say, you know, queer is just a great, you know, it's a great uniting term. And it says like not a lot, but it also says a lot at the same time. So I will defend it. And I think I can think of only one instance in which I've ever been offended by someone's use of the word queer. And again, it was like sort of what Bri was saying. It's about intention. It was someone who did that like, oh, there's a queer right there, you know, that sort of thing. Like, I don't know why I gave him that accent right there. It's a student of mine. But
what accent was that?
I don't know. It's general
Southern homophobe.
Southern homophobe.
That was some deep
Sorry.
South right there.
I know it. I know it well.
Okay.
I'm in Atlanta, so
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a useful term, and I don't think there's any issue with straight cis people using it. Just personally, I'm not speaking for everyone. Just personally,
I was just wondering for myself and anyone that, because it's like a touchy subject. It feels like because you don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know. I talk with you guys and I talk with others, so I thought it was acceptable. I guess the bottom line to this entire episode is to treat people like people.
What a revolutionary concept.
Oh, it took almost 2 hours to figure that out. Brennan, final thoughts, sir.
First final thought is I am definitely glad you asked that. You know, I've used the term a couple times tonight, and if I'm honest, you know, it's definitely presumptuous, but at the same time, getting to know the people in the Twitter community that do fall under the umbrella, as you guys put it, I do see it used as a term of unity, and I guess that's my interpretation of it. So I would throw out, I apologize if, for asking that question, is it okay to use that term 2 hours into the episode? But at the same time, like I said, I guess I didn't think anything of it because I do see it used in that positive context to provide this, I can't think of a better word than sense of community, a group of people that work together and have common goals. Beyond that, my final thoughts are thank you to the three of you because it is Monday night and you guys stayed up late with us to have a really important discussion, I think. And I appreciate you being open and honest and willing to talk about all this stuff and drop some sage wisdom on Patrick, myself, and hopefully a bunch of listeners.
It
Thank you
is
guys for
a
the
pleasure.
invite.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for giving us the forum to have this kind of conversation. And you folks are absolute gems.
Right back at you. And you know what? Like, this was kind of unintentional. Ronald Kelly was the one that said, "Hey, we should talk about faith and religion and horror." So he's the one that got the ball rolling with the round tables being on something. It's about horror, but it's so much bigger.
Mhm.
Then the second one was accepting rejections, which got into race discussions with Sina Pelayo, Gabino Iglesias, and S.A. Cosby, and then Joe Lansdale. And then the third one was with Brennan as a guest and Sina, Mercedes, and Yardley. I'm missing someone. Tyler Jones, the one that created
Rhonda.
And Rhonda J. Garcia, or Rhonda J. Joseph. She goes by two names, where we talked about parents that had children with varying disabilities that the parents use writing as an outlet. Sorry, I'm tired myself. But you know what? You guys are awesome. These round tables, they make. I gotta say, it's not about us, but I'm speaking for Brennan. But it kind of feels like we have some kind of neat purpose for this podcast beyond entertainment. So that's my final thought. I thank you guys. It means the world that you offered us this time to just speak about something that I gotta figure was pretty hard to speak about a few years ago, especially to people that you never even met face to face. So thank you for that, listeners. I hope that this helps someone out there. And next episode is next Monday. That'll be episode 102 with writer Tony Rapino. He is a sculptor and a writer. He recently ghost wrote this book that now has a bunch of merchandise, including action figures, called The Order of Cosmic Champions. What is that exactly? We'll find out next week. You got many choices, listeners, and podcasts. Thank you for picking us.